Welcome to the Unscripted podcast. I am your host, Sarah Nicastro. Today, we're going to be getting an inside look at QuidelOrtho's 5 keys to positioning service as a differentiator. I'm excited to be joined today by Matt Tice, who is the Vice President for Global Services at QuidelOrtho. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Thank you for being here. Before we get into our discussion for today, tell everyone whatever you would like about yourself, your background, and if you don't mind, in case anyone is not familiar, give just a little overview about Quidel's business.
Sure. Yeah, first and foremost, husband for almost 19 years to my wife. I would say high school sweethearts, but she didn't have a lot of interest in high school at the time. 4 kids now, and 3 of them being boys, and really love spending time with them. But I would say a lot of the things I learned from them are transferable to service, like patience and survival. Most of all, when it comes to the career, started at Ortho Clinical Diagnostics, went to school for engineering, and always felt like I would get into R&D. Loved the biomedical space, a lot of innovation going on back then with patient care, and found that through my internships, really didn't enjoy everything that was going on in R&D. Felt secluded from the commercial organization. Felt like I didn't have a lot of relationships with the end customers. So moved to Ortho for my first job and really found passion in the service business. And that's where my service career started. And was with Ortho for a few years and got my MBA because I really wanted to raise my financial acumen around the business and learn how the business operated. So jumped into finance actually a little bit after my MBA. And at that time, we were carving out of J&J and moving to a standalone company in private equity. And it was really interesting because I jumped back into service at that time, and we went through the pandemic. We did an IPO, and then ultimately acquired at the end of the pandemic by a company called Quidel and became QuidelOrtho. So while I've worked here for, I would say, 19 to 20 years, and it's been the main company I've worked for, it's felt like 4 different companies. And at QuidelOrtho, ultimately, we're in the healthcare space. We design and support diagnostic analyzers, everything from testing for cancer and diseases to respiratory swabs and COVID over-the-counter tests.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's interesting knowing a bit about your story. Like you said, 19, 20 years, same company, but a lot of change within the organization. But then you have gone and acquired knowledge and come back. So the company has changed, and then you've evolved to where you're bringing different perspective back to what you're doing. Love the point you made about the parallels between parenting and service and leadership and business in general. I think there's nothing that proves resilience more than being a working parent, especially of 4 for you. So definitely. So we had a chat about something that a lot of service leaders have grappled with, are grappling with, which is the way that service can get lost within the business. So it can become sort of, an afterthought, a post-sale necessity. There's a lot of different ways you could refer to kind of the way it's perceived within the broader business. And you've worked really hard to position service differently and strategically at QuidelOrtho. So I want to talk about some of the things that you've found helpful in that quest and what you've learned along the way, because, I'm sure it has not been all smooth sailing. So the first is you've focused on breaking down silos and ensuring that service has a spot at every table and is viewed as a valued partner within the business. So I think what will be on everyone's mind is how. How
Yes.
can I do that? So what's worked well, and maybe what did you learn along the way in, trying to do that? Because it takes time.
Yeah, I think when I first started in service, one of the things I noticed is exactly what you said, that service felt like, hey, it's a cost center, and it was kind of an afterthought. The deals closed. I think the sexy part about commercial is going and winning the big customers. But what I noticed was while those deals were being made, a lot of commitments were made that fell on services shoulders. And I was watching the service organization time and time again kind of rise to the occasion and deliver for our customers. And I really wanted to bring the focus on them because they were going above and beyond to create that customer experience. So I was really looking for ways within the commercial organization, how do we recognize service and all the hard work that they're doing? And I started to think about how commercial really focuses on retain, focus on growing customers and how to win new customers. And for me, fundamentally, service is all about retain. It's how we retain customers. That customer experience kind of becomes the glue that holds customers to our business. And we have hundreds of thousands of interactions every year with customers and opportunities to really, every single one of those is an opportunity for us to bind that customer to us. So I wanted to amplify that, really bring the spotlight to that. So really targeting services. Hey, we're the retain pillar. It's something that commercial doesn't have to focus on. Services got you there. And it was amazing when we started to highlight huge retention wins or our retention rates because of service. You started to hear the commercial organizations say things like, hey, everyone's in sales, right? And I think we all are in sales. I believe that. But for the first time, even this year, the first time I heard, hey, we're all in service because it has now become such a critical part of the entire commercial operation here. And I would say from there, once you get the commercial organization hooked, it kind of has to grow to the cross-functional organizations. And I spent a lot of time really just injecting myself into their leadership teams to help them also understand how service was winning customers to stay with us and the importance of service and that customer experience. And ultimately, they wanted to start to get into the game and again, help amplify that for our business.
Yeah, that's great. I think what a moment where you can kind of feel like you've achieved something when they say we're all in service, right? You hear we're all in sales all the time, but you don't always hear that perspective. So that's an important moment of, seeing how that effort is paying off. I'm interested if there's a way for you to speak to so what this made me think about as you were describing, how you understood, okay, here's what the perception is. I would like the business to see it in this different lens, so if retention is a huge focus for the business, how do I position service as, helping that objective, the role we play there? And then, you mentioned that you had to sort of get this, hold on the commercial fit that service was bringing. So you had that common understanding, and then you worked across functions to really embed yourself in those teams, to build those relationships, to help people understand, the value of service. As you're describing that, what I'm thinking about is, wow, that's a lot of time and a lot of effort. And to do that job, you need to be able to really be doing the leadership job well. And what I mean by that is I've had some different conversations on this podcast. One that comes to mind is with Roy Dockery about often service leaders, especially service leaders who have come through the ranks, they tend to get pulled back into problem solving, instead of that more strategic leadership of let me be an advocate for the whole function and let me go out and change these perceptions and build these relationships, et cetera. I'm just wondering if there's anything you can speak to in terms of what has helped you be able to prioritize that work instead of getting, drug back into like the problem of the day that needs solved day after day after day. Because I think a lot of leaders get stuck there.
Yeah, I think it's actually a really good call out. I, for one, was found myself in that exact spot early on in my career, first service leader position, and was in the daily firefighting. And it was really hard for me to pull myself out of that to do
Hmm.
exactly what we did do here. And it really comes down to being intentional in my mind that you have to carve that safe space out where you're just focused on relationships. And it feels like the payback is further out in the future, but it could not be more important than kind of trying to get your team to step up for the firefighting, and you need to really be intentional about those relationships. And when I wasn't doing that, for sure, service was not positioned where it needed to be. And when I was
Hmm.
doing that, everything was going well. So I think that that's a really important point.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. I mean, it takes a lot of discipline, right? Because it's one of the pieces Roy and I spoke about is that, and we were just chatting before we started recording that we have a new podcast coming out, Frontline Unscripted. And I had my first conversation the other day with a master technician in the HVAC space. And, what drew him into wanting to do that work is that he loves solving problems. Like he said, there's nothing I love more than going out and fixing someone and seeing how it makes someone's day. There is a thrill to that. There is a reward to that. And when, it's harder than we maybe talk about to give that work to someone else and go kind of fight these internal battles on behalf of the whole function, where that payoff, that reward, you don't necessarily experience every day. It's long, sometimes it takes time, it takes cycles of feeling. I mean, I'm not trying to, speak on your behalf, but I'm sure there's moments of like, am I even getting anywhere? Like, can I really like affect change in the way I'm trying to and shift these perceptions? It takes time. Where when you allow yourself to be in those day-to-day problems, you kind of get this instant gratification of that, being the hero.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. And I think even some of the mistakes I've made along the way before having that trust with those cross-functional leaders, really going to them in an urgent situation and trying to get support before that trust is built. I think in service, our sense of urgency is always so much higher than probably other areas of the business. And going to a partner without having that trust established first and doing that intentional hard work, like you mentioned, um, can actually backfire on you.
Hmm.
And so you want to see the other groups operate with a high sense of urgency, but you have to invest that time first to earn their trust.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so the second key that I want to talk about is gaining ELT buy-in to invest in service. And so you mentioned earlier on that you've worked in different areas of the business and you actually spent a year and a half in finance. And so I think that gives you a different perspective, certainly, than some service leaders have. And I'm just curious if you can share a bit, what you've learned through that experience of how to communicate in the most productive ways with the ELT.
Yeah, I think I feel very fortunate that I spent time in finance, especially when we were divesting from a large company like J&J, because there's just so much going on and you learn so much about a business. And I found myself oftentimes supporting leaders, and I found that I just wanted to really absorb how they presented, how they positioned different initiatives, how did they get funding, and I think a few things that I noticed. One, first and foremost, when they walked in the room, they checked their bias at the door, they checked their emotions at the door, and they came in with really great storytelling. And I really appreciated that about the leaders that I was around. And it wasn't just storytelling, it was like really backed with robust data sets. And it was really hard to argue the initiatives that they wanted to invest in because they had done all their homework. And I think the other thing that was really great is I felt like they just knew everything about the competition. They spent a lot of time benchmarking, no matter how hard it was to get that information. But being able to position yourself against the competition and where we need to invest really made them successful. And so I took that back when I left finance and took that to service. And I think one of the advantages in service is we've got so much more data than just financial data. We've got telemetry data coming off of our systems, volumes, segmentation data with commercial, and really tried to use all of the data to be a really great storyteller when I was pitching an investment or an initiative. And I think the other thing that I learned was you have to have a strong finance partner. They have to be right by your side, walking in lockstep with you. And because of that, you don't always just pitch against EBITDA or against revenue, but what we found success pitching against lifetime customer value. In service, you're making a lot of investments around customer experience that don't always directly link to revenue or EBITDA. And so trying to talk about the story of a customer coming and staying with us, and how can this help them stay with us longer, and then they grow with us over time, has been really successful. I think another position I have, also being in service, that maybe is a little bit different than investments in other parts of the business, is services a people business. And so you're making investments in technology that ultimately impact people at the end of the day. And so I would really recommend having a strong HR partner that can also
Hmm.
help you get data on attrition rates and time to value and everything about the people, because a lot of what we're investing in is to drive the employee value proposition. Why would I want to be in service at QuidelOrtho? And having that type of data as well has really gone a long way with building out that whole story of why we should make the investment.
Yeah. That's really good advice when you talk about having a strong HR partner, having a strong finance partner. What you're talking about that kind of struck me, and it's because I'm thinking about my own ineptitude, is what I think is interesting about the point you made in how you artfully combine storytelling with data, because I think people are typically geared toward one or the other. So I fancy myself a storyteller. I like words. I like discussions. I like more philosophical type things. I tend to go off of intuition or gut feel. I really don't love data. And then you have people who will throw analytics around, and people like me are like, what's the meaning, right, of it? The ability to bring those two things together, I think, is an art form that we don't talk about enough. We talk about the importance of storytelling, but I think thinking about the role of data in that, and how much more impactful it makes data versus data standing on its own, is a really, really good point, because especially when we think about influence at the ELT level, you need to be able to do both. I think that's where often leaders are struggling, is they're using one or the other of those tactics. They're not marrying them together in a way where you're adding context to the data that resonates, that, connects the people you're speaking to whatever that information is telling. So I really, really like that point. I think that's interesting and a good reminder for myself to not hate data so much. Maybe use it more to my advantage. I don't
we're,
hate
we're a
it.
good
I
we're
just, you know.
we're a good match because I come from the data side of the spectrum,
Mhm.
and I'm trying to work my way back towards storytelling. So
Yeah. It's just, there's nothing wrong with either, right? But understanding the power of, okay, if I incline more towards storytelling, I need to remember to rely on the finance partner and the HR partner to help really lend credibility to the points I'm making. And if I tend toward data, I need to really push myself to think about, what color can I add to this to really drive this point home and to make it have an impact with the audience that I'm speaking to.
absolutely.
Okay. All right. Third key is, so you have created a commercial strategy that you feel really good about, that is centered around providing customer experiences that customers will not want to lose. So, can you talk a little bit about how you created this strategy, and, what you feel has made it helpful in positioning service within the business?
Yeah, I think it wasn't always there for us when we became a standalone company. I think service as a differentiator really wasn't on our radar yet, and I'm really thankful for the leaders that came in during that private equity time that said, "Hey, this could be our identity. Service could be our identity while we're turning the business around." And it kind of came back to that retain, grow, win. Let's plug in service to retain. Let's have really high retention rates with our customers, and let's use service as our differentiator. And that doesn't come naturally. I think a lot of what we did early on in the early days was we had to go out and ask customers what's important to you, because if we're going to differentiate for you, we need to know what's important to you. And we did this huge fact finding mission, and really prioritized what our customers felt like were the most important attributes of our business to them. And we took that, and we put measures around those things, and I think we religiously drove to those, to the point where We had a customer excellence scorecard, for example, that went all the way up to our executive team, and the executive team was asking monthly, "Hey, how are we doing on time in full? How are we doing on reliability?" Because they saw how it connected to customers being retained with us, but also growing with us. And I think, for example, one of those measures was reliability, and I think executives might not understand all the different measures that we track endlessly in service around reliability, but they did know. Our customers told us, hey, 70% of decisions we make in our hospital are based on your equipment and the outcomes from your equipment. So it has to be super reliable. So we're like, all right, that's going on the customer experience scorecard, and we're gonna track that and drive to that, and make sure not just the executive team knows, but all the way down to our front lines has visibility to how we're doing against those measures.
Hmm. So you, so the strategy was created with a lot of customer sentiment, right? Like really understanding what is most valuable, and where can we amplify that? Where can we expand upon that? How can we really focus on what they care most about to embed ourselves within the business? So I think that kind of segues to the next point, which is the fourth key here is that you've worked hard to ensure that you're using KPIs that are aligned, clear, and relevant. So what can you share, about that? And I guess I'm curious how that customer sentiment then factored into what you decided you would be measuring performance against.
Yeah, I think we have a lot of the traditional service KPIs here at QuidelOrtho that you probably would find in any service business. And I think we focus on operational KPIs. We focus on responsiveness. That's really important to customers. How quickly we respond, and then effectiveness. How quickly do we respond, but also how effective is the solution that we delivered. And I think one area when I came into this most current role that I'm in, you get that scorecard and you start to think about, okay, what can we do here to make changes to keep driving the business? And it's tempting to just focus on the reds, right? Anything that's red on the scorecard. Okay, how do we quickly go fix that? And that's important. But I would say maybe something I did a little bit differently was like I looked at the greens, and where are we green on these scorecards for KPIs that supposedly really matter to our customers. They're green. They've been green for a long time, and it wasn't really creating an environment for driving continuous improvement to continue to meet customer expectations. So I really actually dug into the greens and looked at how were we calculating those, where was there opportunity to improve. First time fix is a great example, very traditional service KPI. We were green for forever on that, and it felt like there's more that we could do. So we rebaselined, we moved it a little bit more towards industry standard, and we set a harder target, and the teams responded really well. And that all tied back to being more effective in service and driving reliability for our customers at the end of the day. Another area is NPS. So we transactional NPS. Every single interaction we have with customers, we ask them, how did we do? Would you recommend us? And it's a great question to ask, but it was always above 90%. Very, very high NPS scores for our remote team and on-site team. And I'm really thankful for Jackie Gunther, who's in our customer enablement team, to challenge us and say, hey, there's not much signal to noise here. We're not really responding the way we should. We're not driving continuous improvement. So we're migrating towards customer effort scores and customer satisfaction, which is going to give us tons more data on how to respond to our customers and drive a better experience.
Hmm. So I'm curious a couple things around KPIs. One is how how often are you changing them? And how, you there's different schools of thought, right? On, keep it really narrow so that teams know exactly what they need to be focused on. Or, obviously there's an argument that there's some value in paying attention to a broader set of criteria. So how often are you reviewing and maybe changing these, and how focused are you keeping them at any one time?
Yeah, I think right now we meet as a leadership team within service on an annual basis. Typically, when we're setting our operating plan, we also set our KPIs around the operations of service. And then we monitor those monthly and we adapt as we go. I think we've been on both ends of the spectrum. We've had too few, we've had way too many, to the point where the frontline team is saying, like, what do you really want us to focus on? There's too much here. So I think we're more balanced in the middle right now.
Hmm.
And again, I think what we're really trying to do is find KPIs that link back to those top attributes that customers tell us we absolutely have to deliver on as mission critical to their business. We try to find the right KPI mixture that helps us run our business, but also helps meet our customer expectations.
Hmm.
We do adapt. We do put measures in place where maybe it drove the wrong behavior and we've moved in the wrong direction. And for sure, we'll assess those on a regular basis and adapt as we go.
Yeah. I think it's, we do a survey each year with our standout 50 leaders. And one of the questions we've asked both years now is around KPIs. And it was interesting to me. There was a real shift from the first year we did it to this most recent report that will be coming out soon in terms of, the first year, so this would have been 2020, end of 2024, you had a lot of insights within the survey that lended themselves to this view of service as a differentiator, service as a growth opportunity. But the KPIs were very productivity heavy, right? And to your point, if you're not balancing that well, you end up having a focus on customer experience that you are working against with how you're incentivizing field technicians to go out and work. Because if it's jobs per day, they're not focused on necessarily quality the way they need to, or relationship or experience. They're just trying to churn through and get in and out, right? And
That's
so I
exactly
think
right.
it is a balancing act. At the same time, you have to manage costs, you need to keep people productive, but how do you do that in a way that everyone understands that it isn't at the cost of the customer experience? It needs to be, both are important. I'm also curious, you talked about finding the right balance of those sort of business objectives and then making sure that you're grounding those in the customer focus. I'm also curious how you leverage these indicators and performance to take back to those broader business conversations. So whether that's to illustrate, here's how we're contributing. Here are some of the things that help us strategically be important to the business by retaining customers, or here's an area where maybe we need investment because we're really struggling to achieve what we feel would be a good outcome in this area. How do you leverage those in those conversations?
Yeah, I think again, it kind of goes back to our earlier conversation about storytelling. With KPIs, it's also important to make sure that a reliability KPI might mean nothing to someone in operations or quality or supply chain, but it's like telling the story, like why are the reliability KPIs so important, and linking it back to like the outcomes we want, and showing, hey, when we have really great reliability, we have really high retention rates, and we have really high probability of repurchase. So that's why it really matters, and that's why we need to drive that. And it kind of raises the sense of urgency because they also see the outcome linked to the KPI than just
Hmm.
seeing a green or red on a scorecard. That's been really successful for us, and we've been really fortunate to have a lot of data around that from third parties that really help us strengthen that argument that these KPIs are important and mean something to the entire business.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And the last thing I wanted to talk about on KPIs is what's your take on, how you ensure clarity and buy-in to the extent you're seeking it from the front line? Like, how do you ensure that they're clear on how they're being measured and what is expected, and that they, to the extent you want them to, agree with what it is that you're prioritizing?
Yeah, I think first of all, we're a smaller company, so I feel very fortunate that I can travel around like most of January and meet the frontline teams, and I know a lot of them personally, and it's really easy to connect with them and understand why are we moving in this direction, or why are we measuring this, and changing the targets. But outside of that, I think what's important is to remove complexity around the KPIs, like we were talking about. You can have two KPIs and totally miss a couple of things, but if you have 20, it's too complex to understand. And so I think we've done a really good job finding a balanced approach, just these are the operational critical KPIs that we're going to track. These are the responsiveness. These are the effectiveness ones that we want to track, and making sure they, again, kind of linking it back to the outcomes we want to see. What's in it for them? Why would certain reliability KPIs actually be beneficial to them,
Mm-hmm.
with less visits? So really the communication is the biggest part. I feel lucky that we can do it face to face for a lot of our frontline teams, but you have to have that strong connection with them when you roll them out.
Yeah. And I think, regardless of size of organization, what I hear from leaders is that there is no substitute for having those conversations face to face at some regular interval. So, whether you're fortunate to do that because it's a relatively small business and you can, figure out how to see these people in person yourself, or whether you're relying on your direct team to have some of those conversations, that ability to, connect with them and make sure that communication is landing is really important. Okay, so we've been talking about some of these strategic and internal things that have helped you position service as a strategic part of the business and as a differentiator. You can't do that without a frontline workforce. And so, another key aspect of this is making sure that you are doing what you need to attract, hire, retain, and equip your workforce. And so you mentioned earlier that there is a focus on employee experience. Can you talk a bit about, how you're handling this workforce bit and what you're doing to make sure that you have the actual humans that you need to go and make good on, what you're evangelizing to the ELT and to the business?
Yeah, I think anyone that spends any time in service or around service knows that it's significantly changed over the past 10 years, especially because of the pandemic. And the front line is super critical, but it's also, you're not going to find team members on the front line that decide to stay in field service for 25 years anymore. And so the dynamic has changed quite a bit. And I think that we've responded really well with providing a lot of flexibility. Teams that were historically always in the office together, we've been able to make them remote. It's allowed us to um, hire talent from broader markets, which has been really great, and provide the same coverage that we need to for our customers. But there's some areas of our business where they really enjoy that culture of being in person and collaborating together, and we haven't changed that either. But I think really post pandemic, I believe that it's the discussion has shifted way beyond compensation for front lines, right? And I think that was historically one of the big buckets to focus on. But thankful for John Carroll and the Service Council, all the data they provide us has shown that it's not just that. It's also about work-life balance. It's about addressing the technology gaps that we have, searching for information that's stressful, site revisits stressful, how much they value autonomy in the job. So I think we've had to really respond to those things, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what really ties into the investments that we're pitching to our executive team, is how do we create a better environment for our front lines. The other area is just the career progression, right?
Mm-hmm.
And being a field engineer for 20 years again is not going to be common anymore. So how do we put more layers into our field organization so they can grow their competencies and see progression through the field service organization? And that also means that your front lines is changing frequently. So what we found to be very successful is things like apprentice programs, where apprenticeship, you can come in, you can learn the job, and plug in and have a bench essentially for your field service team, so you don't disrupt the customer's operations when an opening occurs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about from a leadership perspective? So I agree with everything you've said, and I think it's really good to recognize, I always challenge folks that I speak to that say, we're hiring, but then, folks don't stay because someone else will pay them $1 more an hour. And I'm thinking, yeah, I mean, I doubt they're really leaving over just that, right? Like, it's to your point, compensation is it's paying fair compensation is certainly important. It's just not the only thing that matters. So understanding what it is about the overall, employee experience, and where, to your point, you need to adapt. I think organizations that are hoping that they can just wait it out and the workforce will comply are foolish. So that's smart. But I think another really important factor for the employee experience is their leaders, right? So what are you doing, I guess, from a leadership perspective to, not only offer different layers of progression because technicians don't want to stay in that role for 20 years, but to make sure as they're progressing, you're supporting them in becoming, strong managers and leaders?
Yeah, I think the frontline leader role is super critical right now as we kind of go through this change with our front lines. And I think it's so tempting with the pandemic and some of the attrition we're seeing in the service industry to promote a very successful technical, I'll say a technical leader on the team to be a people leader. And that might not always be the right decision. In a lot of cases, it is great. And you have to make sure you properly equip them.
Hmm.
And a huge focus around frontline leadership development is taking place just because of that, but also recruiting frontline leaders from outside of the organization. We've seen a lot of success, for example, bringing in leaders from IT, leaders from R&D, leaders from quality, who just bring a whole different perspective to the service business and are great people leaders, maybe not technical like we are in service all the time, but really great people leaders and can continue to drive that customer experience. So I think it's really looking broader for
Hmm.
those frontline leaders, but also equipping them properly. And for sure, I know when I took my first role as a frontline leader, I felt unprepared, and I don't want
Hmm.
to put anyone else in that position. So big focus there for us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's smart. I mean, just understanding that historical, like if you're good at the job, you'll just move up into management and leadership. It works really well sometimes. There's plenty of examples of it, but not always. So being conscious of that. And then to your point, I like the idea about balancing the opportunity for individuals who are a fit for it to progress with that idea of bringing in some folks from outside the organization, because it can be really helpful to get those different perspectives and integrate different styles and approaches that can make the team overall better. Um, so, last key area I want to talk about is you know, technology is a crucial enabler of service as a differentiator and as a core aspect of the business. How are you looking at technology to complement the other keys that we've talked about and to help with the employee experience, help with customer outcomes? What's your approach in this regard?
Yeah, I think the word you use is probably perfect. Complement. Like going back to what makes us successful with service as a differentiator is the relationship we've built with these customers, years and years of trust. They're with us for over 10 years. And a lot of times our field service teams have become part of their operation and part of their family. And I think the last thing you want to do is throw AI in the middle of that and kind of mess that up. And so we're really looking at it as a complement, like you said. I think you look at everything that's on the plate for a field service engineer or a remote support agent, and they're doing a lot. Like I use the
Mm-hmm.
technical solutions center as an example where they're taking calls, they're trying to listen, they're taking notes, they're searching databases, they're trying to put a game plan together, they're trying to respond with empathy, and there's just a lot there that is not necessarily value added to that customer relationship, like
Mm-hmm.
taking notes and summarizing the call so we can document it properly. So I really believe where we see AI coming into our business is doing some of the mundane, low impact, low importance tasks like, hey, let's take the voice to text, transcribe and summarize a call, or let's search 10,000 documents for the right answer so that you don't have to spend time searching and getting frustrated. And that really allows us to kind of bring our heads up out of the laptops or the equipment we're working on and focus on the customer. And I think that it's allowing us to just elevate that relation and really going back to service council, Elizabeth Dixon talking last year. One thing that I really took away from that was the role of AI and what it plays in service. And she said, AI is here to automate the transactional so we can elevate the relational. And that's
Mm-hmm.
exactly the approach we're taking at QuidelOrtho.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And, to your point, if you protecting the customer experience is a crucial lens to be looking through. But to your point, if you even bring that back to looking at the employee experience, there are many, many opportunities in most employees' day-to-day work for AI to offload things from them that they find frustrating, annoying, time consuming, arduous, that they don't enjoy, that isn't, it's not satisfying them and it's not ultimately helping the customer. So those are the things that you can look at. Great, let's apply technology here so you can focus more on, using your empathy in these conversations, or solving these challenges, and coming up with this game plan, the things that just require more of that brain power and humanity, right? So
Absolutely.
yeah, I love that. Okay, well, this has been really good, Matt. Beyond these six key areas that we've talked about, are there any other lessons learned that come to mind when you think about the advice you could give to help other leaders who are really working to, elevate the understanding, the perspective, the respect, for service within their broader businesses?
Yeah, I think when I look back at my career and kind of going back to earlier in the conversation, don't spend so much time firefighting. Make sure you're just carving out that time for relationship building. I think we talked about internal to the business, but one thing I think a lot of people know Linda Tucci, and I'm really thankful for her as a friend and mentor. But she taught me, you got to go broader than just your own business and
Mm-hmm.
your own organization. And someone like myself, I've worked in the same company for almost 20 years now. She's really brought to light how critical external relationships are, external benchmarking, to really keep raising the bar and finding areas where maybe we don't have the best idea, or we're not responding the best way, or thinking of those new ideas or new technology that we could apply to our business. It won't come from just networking in your own organization. You got to go broader and outside of industry, even. And I think a lot of the great ideas we brought in to build this customer experience here have come externally. And I
Mm-hmm.
can't stress enough. I wasn't doing that early in my career, and now I do it a lot because it is so important to keep growing yourself as a leader. And again, I'm very thankful for Linda teaching me that lesson early on.
Linda is a legend. We love Linda. And that's a really good point. I think it's, there again, it's a piece of the job that can be very difficult to prioritize from a time perspective when you feel this pressure to do everything that is on your plate. But when you can make the time, to your point, I think the ideas and the insights and the inspiration that can come from those interactions is invaluable. I also think there's this element for, leaders, like yourself, and within, our audience, when I've hosted events where people come together for a day in person and they interact and they hear these different perspectives. One comment I've gotten multiple times, and it means the world to me, is I feel so much less alone, right? So it's, you want the other ideas. Sometimes there's also such value in the reassurance that, especially for, you've been there 20 years, sometimes people have moved jobs enough where they know, like, no one company has this all figured out. But it can be so reassuring to hear people's approaches, but also to understand that there is no organization that has completely mastered all of these challenges and is doing everything right. So we all have something to learn from each other, but we can also, help each other feel a little bit more at ease that, like, we're not alone in the struggle. So I like
It's
that
a
as
great
well.
point and so true.
Yeah, yeah,
Huge
yeah. So,
reassurance.
I mean, if I can offer that to anyone, it's, I'm honored to do so. So, well, Matt, thank you so much for coming and sharing some of your, perspective and what's worked for you, what you've learned along the way. It's wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sarah, for having me.
Yes, you can find more by visiting the home of Unscripted at futureoffieldservice.com. The podcast is published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more at ifs.com As always, thank you for listening.